Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The topic of this particular video is to continue with our understanding of how markets function. And we know that the term market means the interaction of the relevant buyers and relevant sellers of a good, an asset, or a resource. And in the previous recorded video, I developed the notion of demand and the first law of demand and the various characteristics of demand. So today what I want to do is move our attention to the other side of the market, and that is the supply function, and derive all the factors that influence sellers and in the amounts they're willing and able to sell in the marketplace. And where is it? Good. And as we develop these models, we're going to employ this assumption of what's called ceteris paribus. Ceteris paribus means that as I develop the analysis, I'm going to look at one factor at a time. The actual term means all other things held constant. But what does that mean? Well, what it means is that as I talk about the influence of a change in income on demand, I'm assuming nothing else is changing. So we're able to scale down and itemize each of these factors. And then in the real world, all of them are interacting simultaneously. But that's the way you study. That's the way you take it apart and study. If you want to be a science, you have to have some Latin terminology to throw around. Like you have to be able to say, well, you know, that's true, ceteris paribus. And, oh, good, yeah. So that's what it means. So we talked about the fact that if you buy something, you must value it at least equal to the price, greater than or equal to the price. And we measure marginal value as a height, and we draw it as a continuous function. We're not assuming that it declines in a linear manner. We're just saying it declines as you have more of any particular good. And then in using that understanding that I have a willingness to buy and a maximum price I'd be willing to pay for various items, I can derive what is called the demand schedule or the demand function. And it is that whole schedule. It's a schedule of the different amounts that you're willing and able to buy at each alternative price. So always think of demand as the entire schedule. It's not an amount. It's the entire schedule of different amounts at different prices. We read the curve horizontally, and we know that you only buy if your value is greater than or equal to price. So I can determine the quantity demanded by extending the quantity out until the marginal value just matches the price. You'd like to have more, but not at that price, right? More is a good, but at a price of 5, you would only buy 6 units. If the price were instead $2, then the quantity would be $9. So as I said, demand is that entire function. And again, to be clear, we draw it as a straight line, but we're not assuming that it actually is. In fact, when we get into higher divisions, we use a quadratic to represent it. It's more like a curve in terms of actuality. And also, I think I pointed this out in the last discussion, but people who criticize economics say that we assume that when you walk into the grocery store, you know all the relative prices, and if anything has changed since last time, you know it automatically, free, zero cost. Oh, look, Heinz ketchup went up by 10 cents. And they purport that we claim that if that happens, then that night you would put a little bit less ketchup on your burger, right? Because the price is 10 cents more. We don't assume that at all. We're not assuming this is a linear relationship, as I said. This says that if the price goes up to here, then the quantity is cut back. What we really say is that if the price goes up enough, you will buy less. But it does not mean that every time the price changes, you jump and change the quantity demanded. And as I said, it's also not linear. Gasoline prices bounce around all the time, right? They're up 20 cents, they're down 5 cents, and so forth. Most of you don't even look at the price, right? Because you know, well, it is whatever it is, and I'm going to fill the tank. And so that is not negating the first law of demand. It just says, you know, over some sufficient increase in price, you'll buy less, or for some sufficient decrease, you would buy more. So that's the clarification of what we in fact are saying. And that's the first law of demand. And then we went through and noted an increased demand means more being purchased at each price. Quantities measured horizontally, so more means that direction, less means this direction. We went through and enumerated the factors which would determine where demand is, and if they change, would change demand in particular ways. Taste and preference, as I talked about, income or wealth, two possible directions. The normal good, the usual case, income goes up, you buy more. To be complete, however, some goods respond in the opposite way. As your income rises, you buy less of certain products. So we call those inferior goods. Clearly, the price of related goods is going to influence what I buy of a particular good. Most other goods are substitutes, so as they become more expensive, demand would increase for this product. If substitutes become cheaper, demand would decrease for this product. Some goods are used together in an activity. We call those complementary goods, and there we get the opposite kind of adjustment. If the complement becomes cheaper, the activity's cheaper, demand would go up for the other product. DVD players and DVDs. Everybody with me? DVD players get cheaper, people buy more DVDs. That's the complementary relationship. We noted that changes in your expectation about future price will influence what you buy today. And this is particularly true of financial assets, such as stocks, bonds, tranches, ETFs, all of those kinds of things. If you expect the future price to go up, you tend to buy more today, so you can buy it before the price goes up. If you think the price is going to fall, then if you were having stocks, you might sell the stock or certainly delay buying the item until the price falls. And finally, market demand is just adding up the demand functions of the existing buyers in the marketplace. And it is a horizontal summation. This is a new slide I just put in. It's a horizontal summation of the quantities demanded at each price. So if the price were here, Ms. A buys 6, Mr. B buys 3, and Mr. C buys 1. So the total quantity of 10 is the quantity demanded by adding up in that way. Later we'll talk a little bit about efficiency, and we notice that the 10 units only go to people willing and able to pay at least $10. Those are the only ones who get it, and Ms. A gets more because she values them more than the other parties. Now, so that model is complete, and by all means study that video. Market supply, in a similar way, is again a schedule of the different quantities that the sellers are willing and able to bring to market at alternative per unit prices. So much like demand, it's a schedule of what that group is willing to do at different market prices. In general, it is a positive relationship, and that is, in general, as the price goes up, sellers are willing to increase the quantity supplied. And the reason for that is, in the short run, the supply curve is the marginal cost curve of the firm. And so if demand goes up, then in fact you'd be willing to increase production along that marginal cost function. In the long run, it is generally upward sloping because as you try to produce more in the long run, remember that means bringing in additional resources, allowing for all factors to change. You tend to have to use goods or resources that have a higher alternative market opportunity cost. So to get more, you have to put resources in that are more valuable elsewhere, and again, that would cause the curve to go up. Now, let me mention two things that are exceptions to that, or let me go back for a minute. In the case of demand, it is a law. Y'all with me? It's a law. If price goes up, people buy less. If price goes down, people buy more. Demand is always downward sloping. In the case of supply, while it's generally upward sloping, as I've just indicated, there are two exceptions to that. One is called, and I'll try and put a slide in to include this. One is called a constant cost industry, a constant cost industry. And what it means is that as you try to expand production, you're able to duplicate the same technique that's being used by existing firms, and 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 the fact that you're buying more of the resources does not increase the resource price. It's like a farmer who has all this land that is fallow, and he's only growing 10 acres now, and he decides he wants to increase production to 12 acres. Well, he can basically use the same technique and just add 2 acres, and it hasn't changed any of the costs. So in that case, supply is horizontal. It means you can increase, demand increases, it pulls forth more at the same relative price. Finally, there is what's called a decreasing cost industry, And that's a situation where the firm is operating in the range of what's called economies of scale. And so as I increase the rate of production, my per unit cost actually comes down because I'm still in that range of economies of scale. In that case, supply would actually be a downward sloping function, meaning as demand increases, the firm produces more, but cost is lower. So the demand curve, supply curve would actually slope downward in that case. But that's the specialized case. We read the supply curve the same way we did demand. It says at a particular price, the distance to the function is the quantity supplied. And as I said, if the price goes up in general, the quantity supplied increases accordingly. What is behind that curve is the marginal cost of production, the marginal cost or opportunity cost of the resources. And so in order to produce more, you have to get a higher price. And that's, again, why it is upward sloping. Consequently, when you look at the supply curve, this height represents the marginal cost of producing that additional unit. In fact, think about the following. Suppose I'm looking at the supply of people willing to join the armed services at different salary levels, and make this 40,000, 60,000, 80,000, etc. And assume this is assume we're at peacetime, so we're not worried about getting killed. There are all kinds of things to do in the service that are like what you do not in the service. You drive trucks, you repair trucks, you deliver things. You have a supply warehouse. You get stuff out of the warehouse and distribute it. You maintain buildings. You do lots of things that are the same as what you would do in the real world. So if they offer a salary of 40,000, the only people who would come in are people who currently are earning less than 40,000 or equal to 40,000. So this fourth guy here, whatever, 40th guy, whatever, looks like he's earning about $38,000. He's driving a Frito delivery truck. And then the Armed Services comes along and says, we'll pay you $40,000 to drive a truck in the Air Force. So he'd be willing to make the switch. Y'all with me? So then, but at 40,000, the guy who's making 60,000 right now as a manager of a store, well, he wouldn't be willing to come in because he's not making that. If the price goes up to 60, then the people making 58, 59, 57, they would be willing to come in. As long as the price is above your opportunity cost, then that's when that additional quantity becomes available in the marketplace. Now, like demand, there are factors which would cause that supply curve to shift. And like demand, an increase would be what kind of a shift? Yeah, more supply, bigger quantity, so it would be a shift to the right. Same way as it was for demand. Decrease would be a leftward shift of the function. And here's the graphical representation of the supply side of the market. You can see the similarity to demand. Market supply is the sum of the amounts being produced by the existing firms. You'll notice I've drawn the existing firms with different cost curves, utilizing perhaps different technologies of production. And very much like on the demand side, you'll notice that each firm only produces the units where their marginal cost is less than or equal to price. So consequently, the market efficiently coordinates which resources get used. If the price is $10, I'd only produce units where my cost is less than or equal to 10. Same is true for firm 2 and 3. So each existing firm ends up producing where their marginal cost of the last unit just matches the price. And it would be different quantities because of different techniques of production. As we said, an increased supply would be a rightward shift of the function. Decrease would be a leftward shift of the function. So as we did with demand, we'd like to enumerate all the different things that when they change would cause the supply to change, and in what direction would that effect take place. Well, clearly the first determinant of your willingness to produce is the cost of the inputs, the price of all the inputs that go into production. If your inputs become cheaper, then you're willing to sell at a lower price, and that would tend to increase the supply. If the price of inputs goes up, then your marginal cost curve is higher, which is the same as a decrease in supply. So that's a major factor that influences the supply. Now, this one is special because this one is not accounting. This is using economics to think about what is the relevant cost. And the cost of using a resource to produce this good is the value of what I could be getting if I use that resource in its best alternative. It's the opportunity cost of the resource is what I'm giving up. You know, you all decide to come to class, and then there's an announcement that on Thursday at 1 o'clock there's a raffle outside of Oviatt Library, and everybody, you have to be there to win, but everybody gets a raffle ticket. And then half the people will get $1,000. Half the people that are there will get $1,000. How many of you would come to class? None of you, right? Y'all with me? What did I do? I raised the value of an alternative use of your time, and it means the supply decreases, right? If you have better alternatives elsewhere, you'd move into the production of those. I was talking in my 161 class about agricultural production, and many years ago the federal government required by law that all the major oil companies produce I think it's 10% of their summer gasoline has to be made from ethanol, and ethanol is made from plant material, and you can make it from anything. Willie Nelson drives a big bus around, and it's run on called biofuel, which is made from grain and some other kinds of stuff. But because of the political nature of the law and all those red states that grow corn, the government specified that the ethanol has to be made from corn. And I said you can make it from anything, right? You can make it from sugar stalks and so forth. But they specified it has to be made from corn. And so suddenly there's this gigantic increase for corn, increased demand for corn, because they're required to use it. And they had to build refineries all over in Idaho and all these places to process the corn into ethanol. Well, suddenly the demand, as I said, the demand for corn went up. The price of corn tripled. The price of corn tripled because there's this gigantic demand, not for food or for fertilizer, not for food or grain, but now for making ethanol. So as that happened, what did farmers do? In their mix of production, what would you do? Increase corn, right? Because it's 3 times as much. When you do that, you decrease the production of soybeans and all the other substitutes. Well, that's a decrease in supply, which means those prices also went up in a related manner. So a change in the value of the alternative, in this case the alternative was corn, a rise in that value decreases the supply to the alternative products. Third is a change in technology of production, and clearly as technology increases, we're able to do things more cheaply, and consequently supply would increase. You really want to put a double star by this in your notes, because Ray Kurzweil is a futurist. He's a brilliant scientist. When he was 14, he developed the algorithm codes to control an artificial limb. And he's had like 20 companies. He's got 110 patents. He's started companies and then sold them. So he's really a brilliant engineer and scientist, computer scientist. And he's turned to writing about technology. And yeah, and The Singularity is his most recent work, but there's several books that he's written about changing technology. And his point is that the rate of technological change, the rate at which technology is changing, is increasing. Y'all with me? The rate at which we are acquiring new knowledge is getting faster and faster. New knowledge is being discovered faster and faster. And he points out that most futurists use a linear trend line to talk about what will happen in the future. So they look at like Moore's law in computing, and they say, well, if it's been growing at this rate, then it'll just continue to grow at that rate. And so 10 years from now, we'll be up that much from where we are now. And he said, no. He said that would be assuming that technology is stable. He said technology is growing more rapidly. And so, in fact, the rate of growth is an exponential curve, meaning that as technology grows more rapidly, the amount of increased output is going up by a multiple. Some fascinating work. The singularity is the concept that at some point we will be able to map the human mind fully and download all of what is you. All your memories, all your abilities, all your knowledge. We'll be able to scan the brain and actually accumulate that information outside of it. The second factor is that our ability to make computations, the speed at which we can make computations, is increasing dramatically. And at some point, we will be able to put together a computer network that can match the speed of the human brain. The brain processes at like billionths of a second. And right now, you can't do that with computers. But at some point, we will be able to. That's the second element of the singularity. The third is that we would actually be able to take the data that is you and load it into a computer and turn it on, and it would be you. The computer would know everything you know, have all the feelings that you have. Y'all with me? And his point is that, you know, the body, we're constrained in our ability to live because the body is this biological, you know, thing that breaks down over time, right? And trust me, it does break down over time. And so once you've done this and moved individuals into computers, then you're in virtual reality and you can go on forever. You could live forever in that way. So it's a fascinating, I mean, I grant you that one is pretty far out, right, in terms of that. But I would highly recommend reading some of his stuff. There are several TED Talks that he's done that are really excellent on the changing rate of technology. And I think I may have said this to you in the initial discussion, but the one skill you want to acquire while you're here is the ability to learn rapidly, the ability to learn effectively and rapidly. That's why I said to you, learn how to keyboard. Learn how to keyboard. I'm fascinated by people that they just look at the screen and the words come up on the screen, right? I can type about 33 words a minute, and I have to look at the keyboard to do it. It's not two fingers, but it's such a skill. It's such a skill, and that as an interface is becoming more and more. I mean, you guys know that. You guys can do like your phones with your thumb, right? And text like really rapidly. So anyway, that's a big source. And by the way, change in technology is what has led to the world continuing to expand its productive abilities. There was a British economist in the 1800s whose name escapes me, but he wrote a book, and the book said farm output, agricultural output is linear. That is, you plant and then you plant some more land over here. But the growth of population is geometric, and that is you have kids and they have kids, and so the population's growing geometrically, and the ability to produce food is growing in a linear manner, and consequently we will reach a point where people will die of starvation because we can't get enough food produced. The input that he neglected was changes in technology. In the 1910s, 70% of the U.S. population was involved in either growing food or distributing it or processing it or reselling it. 70% of the population. Today it's about 2%, and the output is hundreds and hundreds of times what it was in those times. So changes in technology, a major factor, increasing supply, etc. Finally, more sellers would increase market supply, just like it was for demand. More companies coming in would mean a larger supply in that marketplace. So this is even easier than demand, right? This is even easier than demand. Price of inputs, change in value of alternative outputs, changes in technology, changes in the number of sellers. All of those are the factors which would cause supply to change. Yes, ma'am?
So those are the factors that affect short-term supply or long-term. As you said earlier, short-term is like upward slope, and long-term is vertical?
No. What I was saying is long-term in general is also upward sloping, right? The long-term. Long-term, as you know, means we're allowing for additional firms to enter the industry, right? Long-term is defined as being all things are variable. So we're including adding new firms to produce in that case. It's generally upward sloping in the long term also, because as you try to produce more of any good, you're buying more of certain resources, and you're going to be buying resources that are more costly to produce. You with me? When you expand production, like in farming, when you expand production of corn, you would look at the fertility of your acreages in terms of other products. You with me? So some acres don't produce much wheat, some acres produce a lot of wheat, right? As you expand the production of corn, the first resource you would take is the land that doesn't grow very much wheat, right?
Yes.
Good. But if you continue to try and produce more and more, eventually you have to start using those other acres that have a higher opportunity cost. And that's why supply is upward sloping, right? You have to get a higher price to bring those resources into production.
Yes, but we have the economic of scale as well. And I remember like from the earlier class, Econ 1-6.
Yeah.
Something like it's like vertical, that's the long run.
No. Supply is never vertical. Unless No, it could be vertical in the short run because the existing resources are producing at capacity. In the short run, you could have a vertical supply curve. I'll give you the example. Right now in Santa Monica, there are some number of apartments that exist. You with me? There's some number that's fixed in the short run, right? So if I wanted to study changes in the demand to live in Santa Monica, the supply curve in the short run would be vertical, because there's only 10,000 apartments there, right? Good. But in the long run, you could produce more apartments because you're allowing for everything to change. You could allow for more apartments to be built. So in the long run, supply is never vertical. It's always upward sloping or constant.
Or maybe downward sloping.
That's economies of scale, right? That's when the existing firms are producing where average cost is not at its minimum, right? They're producing some level where if they increase production, average cost would be coming down, right? Good. Okay? Great. Yeah.
So what you're saying is that for short run, you're not able to make as many changes that you're able to do with like long run.
Yeah, there are three periods of analysis, which I probably get to later, but there are three periods of analysis. The first is long run, and long run means everything is variable. You with me? Nothing is fixed. Sometimes that's called a prospective supply curve, because I could build a big building, a little building, I could rent a building, I could use 2 machines or 10 machines, I could use 3 workers or 1,000 workers. You with me? The long run means everything. The long run decision means a decision made when all inputs are variable, when I can change anything. Once I have a fixed input, such as the building that I bought, now I'm making short-run decisions because some of the inputs are fixed and some of them are variable. The building is fixed over the 5 years that I have signed the lease for. Everybody with me? I have to pay the lease whether I produce 0 units or 10,000. The lease price is fixed, and so that's a fixed input. So the decision means I could change the number of workers, I could change equipment, but one factor is in fact fixed. So in my example, the short run would be 5 years, because that's how long that factor is in fact fixed. If you build a nuclear power plant, the expected life of the plant is 40 to 50 years. So for that company, once you've invested in the plant, they're making short-run decisions for the next 50 years because one input's fixed, other things are variable. Finally, when everything is fixed, that's called market period analysis. Market period analysis. And that's when everything is fixed, meaning output has already been produced. Output is fixed. The example is you've raised avocados, you've harvested them, they're on the truck right now. There's 1,000 avocados on the truck. So you can't change the quantity of them. But you still have decisions to make, and that would be, will I try and sell all of them at one location, or will I drive the truck around to different locations? So that is market period analysis because the quantities are all in fact fixed, but there's still alternative decisions I could make to try and maximize profit.
So short run and long run coexist with one another because you really can't have long run, make long run decisions if you don't have those short run decisions.
No. Long run means I'm making a decision when I'm not locked into anything, right? That's why I call it perspective. I'm thinking about expanding my operation into France. Well, I have no resources in France. So I could buy buildings, lease them, rent them, right? I could just do anything I want to. That's long run. Once one of the inputs or more are fixed, meaning I've locked myself in for a period of time, that's a short run decision, right? Good. Now, firms are making short run and long run decisions simultaneously. I think maybe that's what you were getting at. I could be making short run decisions about the existing plant, but I could also be deciding whether to build a new plant. So, very good. Good. So that completes supply, and you can see how easy that is. I mean, there's only those things. Price of inputs, technology, value of alternative outputs, number of sellers. Those are all the factors which would cause supply to move or shift as those factors in fact change. So finally, the market process is to study the interaction of these two groups and see what implications follow from our assumptions about demand and supply and the two groups and their behavior. So just to review, market demand, downward sloping, determined by taste and preference, income, normal and inferior, price of related goods, substitutes and complements, price expectations, and number of buyers. Those are the factors which will cause that curve to shift. Market supply factors are price of inputs, value of alternative outputs, technology of production, number of sellers. So you've now built complete models for each of these two groups of people. You've enumerated all the factors which would cause the sellers to change their behavior, all the factors independently which would cause the buyers to change their behavior. So I can overlay these two functions in the same space because each of them are a depiction of quantity as a function of price. Demand lays out the quantities in response to the market price that you have to pay. And that's the amount buyers are willing to buy at each of those possible prices. Supply is also a quantity-price relationship. It traces out the quantities that the sellers are willing to bring to market at different possible per unit prices in the marketplace. When you look at this, some people will say it is a graph. It's not a graph, it's what? It's not a graph, it is what? Two graphs. Good. Two graphs. One, any question about buyers? There it is, demand curve. Two, any question about sellers? Look at the supply curve. And then we can draw them in the same space because each is a characteristic of that group's quantity response to a change in market price. So my example is avocados, and this is a farmer's market. What is your name?
Ali Reza. Ali.
Ali. Good. That's better. What? She? She, you?
Yeah.
She, you. And Ali. Ali, she, you, and
Angel.
Angel. See that? Ali, she, you, and Angel. You guys are my sellers in this example, okay? You have local farms and you bring avocados to market and so forth. And then the rest of you are all buyers in the marketplace. And this is a local farmer's market. You're used to shopping there all the time. And these are the guys who are selling avocados. Angel just started this season. So you were not here before, but you're now here. And you have little booths and there are chalkboards that show what the prices are, etc. So let's start out by assuming that the sellers believe that the market price is going to be $2.50 a piece. So they're really excited about the market. And according to, our representation of supply, if they could sell for $2.50 each, they're willing to bring 1,100 avocados to market. They have upward sloping cost curves. It's like they're on a hillside. And if they can get $2.50, it's worth harvesting all the way up the hill, right? Even when you have to climb trees and put ladders in. If I can sell them for $2.50, I'm willing to do that. So they bring 1,100 to market. And the market opens up and the chalkboard says ripe Hass avocados, $2.50 a piece. Well, you buyers walk in. How do you like the price? It's kind of expensive, right? It's kind of expensive. So as you look at them, some people choose to buy, some people don't. But the quantity sold is only 300 units. The quantity demanded when you have to pay $2.50 a piece is only 300 units. What is your name?
Norm.
Nam?
Norm, yeah. Like Noam Chomsky.
Nam. Good. Nam loves avocados. Just loves avocados. And they're really pricey, but she buys one, at that price of $2.50. You are? Nicole? Good. And Nicole loves them and she buys too. But at the end of the day, the total amount sold is only 300 units. Everybody with me? Right? Good. Now we want to see how did the market work for each of the two groups. So for you buyers, if you were willing to pay $2.50, were there avocados available? Yeah, there were plenty available, right? So from your point of view, the market worked. Of course you'd like a lower price, right? In fact, stop and think about it. What price do buyers always want? 0, right? And what price do sellers want? Infinite price, right? Wouldn't you like to be able to work for an hour and earn $1 million, right? How many hours would you work? Yeah. And in the last 10 minutes, you already have $800,000. So, yeah, good. As long as you can come back and work again. Good. Sellers want an infinite price. Buyers want 0. So their desires are absolutely the opposite in the marketplace. Opened up $2.50. They only sold 300. They brought 1,100. What do you have? What's that called? Surplus. Good. And the surplus is 800 avocados that are left in the wicker baskets in the stands. So as I said, the buyers walk out. They were satisfied, although the price was higher than they wanted. But how'd you guys make out as sellers? Not good, right? You brought 1,100 to market. You have 800 left over. How will you adjust your behavior next market period? Probably lower price, right? Good, lower price. And the reason is that even people who never took economics, know if there's stuff left over, the way to get people to buy it is to offer it at a lower price, right? Nordstrom understands that, so do farmers. Good. As you lower the price, the quantity you're willing to produce is decreasing. If you can't get $2.50 but only $2, then you're only willing to produce this quantity. And at a price of $1.50, you're only willing to produce this quantity. Good. As the price comes down, notice that the buyers respond in the opposite way. As the price comes down, the quantity demanded is increasing because it's less expensive than it was before. But as long as you are above equilibrium, which is the intersection or X marks the spot, there's downward pressure on price due to competition between the sellers. The sellers are not colluding. We're assuming competition exists between the sellers. That's going to drive prices down. And as the price comes down, the quantity demanded will increase. Until you reach that one price where the rate of production just matches the rate of consumption. And remember, these are rates per time period. These are rates per time period. Good. Suppose instead the market opens up and you guys think that the price is only going to be 25 cents. You're really upset. These cheapo buyers, I'll only be able to get 25 cents. If that's the case, you'd only be willing to bring 200 avocados to market. That's the case where you hire a neighborhood kid to just go out and pick up the avocados around the house, right? It's not worth it at that price to hire the guys with the ladders and do all the other stuff. So you come in and you bring 200 avocados to market. And so the market opens up and the chalkboard says, ripe Hass avocados, 25 cents a piece. 25 cents a piece. You buyers begin to walk in. How does it look? That's pretty good, right? Nam bought one when the price was $2.50. She buys 6 of them today. You with me? You buy 6 of them. They're only a quarter a piece, right? You can make guacamole and all kinds of stuff. Good. And I'm sorry. Nicole bought 1 or 2 last time, and she buys 4 now. Good. By 9 o'clock, what's happened? You've sold out, right? Good. So the market worked really well for you sellers. You took off and went to the beach, right? Because you already sold out and so forth. You stayed around because you're new and you wanted to introduce yourself to people and so forth. Well, as you guys, the rest of you walk in, there's no avocados. In fact, if we could figure out the number you'd be willing to buy when the price per unit is 25, the quantity demanded looks like it's about 850 avocados. But you don't have 850. You only had 200. And so you have what's called a shortage in the marketplace. A shortage means the quantity demanded is more than the amount brought to market, quantity supplied, at that particular price. Sellers are satisfied. They sold out today. But you buyers are very unhappy. Y'all with me? If you got here after 9 o'clock. Good. There's no avocados in the bins. And the price said they were only 25 cents, but there's none available. Buyers are really ticked off because the market didn't work for them, right? And you've had this experience in your own life. Ralph's puts flank steak on sale for like $2 a pound. And by noon, they're sold out. And some woman comes in at 1 o'clock and she saw the ad and there's no flank steak. Well, she will let the sellers know of her displeasure, right? She'll go to the manager and say, listen, you advertised it at $2. There's none back there. You probably never even had any. I want a rain check. I would have been willing to pay $4 for them, right? Good. When you sellers know there's a shortage, what can you do? Raise price. Raise price. Because you know if there are all these unsatisfied people, in fact, some of them would even say to you, listen, I would have paid 75 cents for avocado. Good. As you know you can raise price, then you're willing to increase quantity. Y'all with me? See, that it's always price and then quantity, right? Good. So as you're able to raise price, you'd be willing to bring larger amounts to market. As the price goes up to buyers, that's a bad thing. They're not willing to buy as many units. But as long as you're below the equilibrium, there's upward pressure on price due to competition between the buyers. Remember, buyers are competing against other buyers. Sellers are competing against other sellers. You're competing on your side of the marketplace, etc. Good. What is your name? Looks like a vest. No, the next guy up. John?
Yeah.
Jonathan. Right. John is a contractor here in the Valley. I mean, he's a consultant. And you're negotiating a contract with this couple from back east, and if you get the contract, you will earn $10,000 of economic profit. You with me? Meaning above and beyond all alternatives or anything else, you'll be making a pure profit of $10,000. Good. they're coming out to meet you tonight. They're flying out to meet you tonight, and you're gonna have dinner with them. And his wife loves California salads, right? And so you promised to give him a great California salad. What's a major ingredient? California salads. Avocados. Good. So it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. John comes in whistling about how cool it is. Oh, wow, they're only 25 cents. Oh, there's none. Good. Now, how much would you be willing to pay for 2 avocados? Would you pay $1,000 for them?
No.
Well, if you do, you'll make the salad and you'll earn $10,000 of profit minus 1,000, so you're earning net $9,000 of profit. Would you spend $1,000 each?
Yes.
Yeah. Otherwise, let me make it clear. If you don't have the salad, the contract is off. You don't make anything. Good. Would you pay $6,000 for 2 of them? Well, if you do, you're giving up $4,000 of profit, right? I mean, if you don't, good. You'd be willing to pay up to $10,000 or $9,999 to get those avocados because they represent you're getting $10,000 of economic profit. You with me? Good. So, but they're not. They're none there. So we look back like, well, where did they go? Well, Nam bought 6 of them, right? And when she was getting out of the car, one of them fell out of the bag on the cement. And it's a ripe Hass avocado, so as you know, it punched in the side, right? And she picked it up, and you know, you could take it in the kitchen and take it apart and save most of it, but it only cost you $0.25, right? So you just throw it in your trash can, right? Good. And Nicole, right? Right. And Nicole bought, what do we say, 4, and they were only $0.25, so she fed one to her dog, right? The oil in the avocado is really good for the fur on the dog. So notice when there's a shortage, there's a misallocation of the goods because this guy is willing to pay close to $10,000 to get them, and where did they end up? In the trash can at your place and in the dog dish at your place. Y'all with me? Shortages misallocate the goods. They don't go to the highest valued user. Good. So as long as you're assuming competition on both sides of the market, the price will eventually move to this one unique price where the amount that buyers are willing to buy, that's 600 units per day, matches the amount the sellers are willing to put into the bin, which is 600 avocados a day. Once you reach that level of exchange, there's no incentive for prices to move. Because if you guys raised price, you'd end up with a surplus, right? And you have no incentive to lower price because they're willing to buy that amount at the $1 price. Good. So that is called an equilibrium, market equilibrium. When you hear the word equilibrium, aside from economics, what does it mean? If something's reached equilibrium, what are the characteristics of it? Good. Balance is one way of saying it.
Equal.
Equal. Good. And the balance is the balance of the rate of demand and the rate of supply. Good. And they're in fact equal in that case. What other implication is there? If once you've reached equilibrium, again, louder.
Break even point. Break even. Break even.
Well, not necessarily because this is the market and we don't know what your costs are, right?
Both
Be a
sides
fair
are
game.
well off.
Yeah, yeah. Is there any incentive for change?
No.
No. So equilibrium also means there's no pressure. I'm sorry. Inertia says if you've reached equilibrium, you're not going to change until something else changes. Everybody with me? Good. So once the market price has gotten to that level, as long as there's no other changes, then nothing's going to happen. The next question is, well, how do the sellers know when it has reached equilibrium? And the answer to that is there's a buffer stock between the rate of production and the rate of consumption. And that is called inventory. Y'all with me? The inventory is what's sitting in the bin. And you know at Ralph's, there are avocados 24 hours a day, right? There's always some that are there available to the buyers. Why are they there? They're there because buyers want to examine the product before they buy it, particularly avocados. and like you want to thump the watermelon and smell the cantaloupe and examine the product to see how soft is it or how ripe is it or whatever the case may be. So part of the functions of inventory is to provide information to the buyers of what is the quality of what's being purchased. So let's say you start the day with 100 avocados as your base inventory. Everybody with me? So you start with 100. During the day, you put 600 into the bin, right? That's the rate of production. And during the day, you guys take out 600. So at the end of the day, what's my inventory? 100, right? I started with 100. I put 600 in. You took 600 out. Inventory has not changed. I know I'm in equilibrium then, right? If the inventory is drawn down, then I know what's going on. People are willing to buy more than I put into the basket, which means I can raise price and I can produce a larger amount, right, to match that higher rate of consumption. Inventories build up. That means what? Demand's smaller than I thought it was, right? They're not taking the 600. They're not taking out 600 when I put 600 in. Then I'm going to cut back on production and probably lower price and cut back. So changes in inventory are the signal to the seller of whether or not the market's in equilibrium or not. Right now, every market out there for Florsheim shoes and for avocados and corn and all these different products, those prices are equilibrium prices, or they are moving towards equilibrium. Y'all with me? If they're in equilibrium, then the market has matched up the rate of production to the rate of consumption, and we're good. It's coordinated. It's coordinated between the two. If inventories are building up, then they know we're not in equilibrium. We need to lower prices. Somebody is a buyer for Nordstrom's women's clothing, and what are we in now? September. So back in August, you flew back to Chicago and New York and Atlanta to attend the clothing shows for winter clothes. And your job is to estimate what clothes are now in fashion in Southern California and how much do I think these buyers are willing to buy, and at what price do I think they'd be willing to buy. So you have to place orders now for an inventory to be shipped to you in the fall and over the season, and you're trying to estimate the demand, trying to estimate how much would they be willing to buy at that. Today, Nordstrom's has, let me go back a minute. Years ago, John Macy, who ran Macy's department store in New York, was trying to figure out the rates of sales, and they didn't have computers or anything like that. So he would stand outside of Macy's, and he would count the number of people coming out, and then what percentage of them had Macy's bags. Y'all with me? And then he could get a feeling for how much people are buying, what percentage of the people are buying from him. And he could even estimate, like depending on the size of the bag, he could estimate kind of like what kinds of items, like, oh, that's probably perfume or something, right? And that's probably a whole dress or something like that. Good. That was years and years ago. Today, Nordstrom's has, as you know, computer models and algorithms that show them the inventory of every single item at every store in Southern California. And every day they get updates on the rates of sales of all of these items. So at any point, they can make the comparison of how fast is it selling relative to my inventory. And if it's not selling fast enough, that's when they put it on sale. You guys with me? That's when they know, okay, they're not buying it at the rate, and so on Black Friday, I'm going to lower the price substantially to get rid of that inventory. So markets are always either in equilibrium or adjusting towards them in that way. That's how Florsheim knows exactly how many size 9 shoes they could keep in inventory. And that's the one they're always out of, which is my size. So, good. Good. Quantity demanded matches the quantity produced. Again, remember those are rates. Those are all amounts per time period. Quantity demanded is the rate per time period. Right? No pressure on price. Goods are allocated to the highest valued users. So now we know how prices are determined. They're determined by the interaction of the buyer's behavior, characterized by demand, and the seller's behavior, characterized by supply. If there's an increased demand, we know that's a rightward shift in the marketplace. What is the prediction with respect to price and quantity? If demand increases, what happens to price and quantity? Good. So you can see, you can just trace it out graphically. If that happens, there would have been a shortage at the old price. Price will be bid up to the new level, and quantity would in fact increase. Suppose instead we look at the effect of decrease in demand in the marketplace. Decrease would be a leftward shift. You'd have a surplus at the original price. What happens to price? Comes down. What happens to quantity sold? Comes down. Good. Do the same thing for changes in supply. An increase in supply, a decrease in supply would be a leftward shift. Price tends to go up. Quantity tends to go down as a result of that shift. An increased supply would be the opposite. That would mean more is being produced at each price. That would tend to lower price and increase the rate of sales in the marketplace. So understanding that, you can now turn it around backward and kind of estimate stuff. If you see the price go up, but you don't know what's happened to quantity, what are the two possible reasons for that happening? Price is higher, so either,
Demand increase,
right?
supply decrease.
Excellent, good. Those are the two things which would cause price to rise. If you now know that the price is higher and the quantity is bigger, which side of the market has changed? Price is higher and quantity is bigger. Good, demand's increased, right? And then, using your knowledge, you could look back at why that might have happened. Taste and preference, income, price of other things, right? You know what to look for. If instead the price is falling and you don't know why, and you don't know quantity, what's happened? Price is lower, so
Supply.
has increased or
Demand.
has
Decrease.
decreased. Very good. And this is why you use the graphs. You always draw equilibrium to start, right? Draw an equilibrium, then shift the curve and see what the effects are. And so you can use it prospectively if the product is sensitive to changes in income, and incomes are rising. Demand will tend to increase, which would cause price to tend to be bid up, and quantity would be larger. Notice I'm doing a secondary level of analysis now. The initial analysis says demand increases. Now I know what the implications are of demand, in fact, increasing. Good. And as we said, the role of inventories is to act as the indicator of these changes. Now, while it's true that supplies, give me 2 minutes. While it's true that price and quantity are determined by the interaction of the two curves, demand and supply, the supply curve is really a response curve. The supply curve is really, actually, it's a cost curve. And it responds to where demand is. The rate of production responds to where the demand is. And so if demand increases, it pulls forth a larger amount of production, and it's necessary for price to rise in order to do that. Demand increases again, it pulls forth a larger amount, price is up, quantity is in fact increased. So my point to you is this: prices are demand determined. The price of goods is demand determined. Yes, it's interacting with supply, but supply, as I said, is a response function. Supply says, if I can sell it for this price, I'm willing to produce this quantity. So quantity is a function of price. I'm going to tell one quick story. I have 3 minutes. When I was in graduate school, my wife and I got divorced, and I had custody temporarily of the kids. And Thanksgiving was coming, and you know, my kids were like 3 and 6 or 4 and 6. And you just feel horrible as a parent for your kids. You know, it's breaking up the family, but it had to be done. And so I just felt awful for the kids. And I'd done a lot of cooking, gourmet cooking, but I'd never cooked a turkey. And I remember when Mother cooked it, she would get up at like 4 in the morning, and then she would stuff things up inside the bird, which was just disgusting. And so Thanksgiving's coming, and I want to make it a special holiday, and so I get an idea. So I call the kids together and I say, "What is Thanksgiving about?" And Rick said, "It's the celebration of the harvest." And I said, "Right." And I said, and it took place in the colonies, right? In the colonies, it started. And I said there weren't a lot of turkeys around at that time. And it's interesting, turkeys was one of the easiest birds to find and kill, but they went out, the guys went out hunting, trying to find things to serve. And I said, but up in the Northeast, there were very few turkeys. And so the people up there, a traditional colonial Thanksgiving was live Maine lobster. Live Maine lobster. And I know how to cook lobster really well. You boil salt water till it steams. You put the lobster in. 15 minutes later, it's done. I know how to melt butter. I know how to add lemon juice to the melted butter and so forth. So I said, we're going to have a colonial Thanksgiving. And I was poor, a graduate student, but I went to the local seafood place on Little Santa Monica Boulevard, nice guy, and they had live Maine lobsters, and I've forgotten the price. Let's say it's $10 a pound or whatever it is. So I bought 2 live Maine lobsters and took them home, and we had this great celebration. And so the question is, why did I have to pay $10? Why did I have to pay $10? Well, some person might say, well, they're on the East Coast, so they have to catch them and then ship them all the way out, keeping them cold, and then they have to have them in a tank. And so all those costs are costly, so that's why it costs $10. Wrong answer. The reason I had to pay $10 is because there are other people in West LA who were willing to pay $10. Once the seller knows that, he knows what quantity he's willing to bring in. Y'all with me? Quantity is a function of price. Demand determines price. Final conclusion of the story. My daughter followed my son in classes, and so she got to the 3rd grade, and Rick had been in that class, and Thanksgiving was coming, and the teacher said, are you all celebrating Thanksgiving? And my daughter said, yeah, we're going to have live Maine lobster. And the woman looked at her and she said, you're with your father this year, aren't you? And she said, yeah, right.